So, phases 5 and 6 of the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry started up yesterday. So, where are you up to with disclosure, which has presented numerous problems with late disclosure from the Post Office in previous phases? Have these problems been solved in phase 5 and 6? Let's get an update from the inquiry.
Mr. Beer, can I explain that one of our assessors is joined in remotely this morning, and I understand that before we begin hearing evidence, you wish to raise the issue of disclosure?
Yes. It's a matter of importance that I wanted to update you and the core participants on before we call Mr. Bates to give his oral evidence and commence the substance of the hearings in phases 5 and 6. The core participants were sent an email by the solicitor to the inquiry yesterday that contained relevant correspondence from the Post Office that dates between the 28th of March and the 5th of April sent to the inquiry. That consists of 9 letters. I would propose to give you a brief background before moving to the current issue. I'm going to try and keep it as succinct as possible, but I also think that putting the current issue in context may assist you. So you'll recall that the Post Office's late and problematic disclosure of documents has been a constant theme in this inquiry, resulting in you ordering that we hear oral evidence from the Post Office and its inquiry representatives in 2 disclosure-related hearings held in July and September last year. On the 12th of January this year, the inquiry held a further hearing on disclosure and called Post Office's recognised legal representative, Mr. Jackson of Burgess Salmon LLP, to give oral evidence. You will recall that by and large the key issue that was discussed at that hearing was how the Post Office had discovered a further Post Office repository or data source known as Microsoft Exchange 365. You'll recall that the Microsoft Exchange 365 repository was brought to the inquiry's attention during the Phase 4 hearings, and as a result, the inquiry received numerous, sometimes voluminous, last-minute disclosure of documents said to relate to Phase 4 witnesses.
And that can be things like emails that we use not only in our day-to-day lives personally using Office 365, but also many organisations. It's hard to believe that this wouldn't be identified very early on by the Post Office as a source of information for them.
Some occasions, only days before some witnesses were due to give their evidence. During the January hearing, Mr. Jackson said that such last-minute disclosure by the Post Office during the Phase 4 hearings had been, quote, suboptimal. Those late disclosures had put immense pressure on the inquiry counsel and solicitor teams, who worked extremely hard to ensure that the Phase 4 hearings could in fact continue as planned. In some instances, regrettably, a decision was made to postpone or reschedule a witness at short notice, including, you'll remember, Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Longman, both of whom the inquiry has now scheduled to hear during phases 5 and 6.
So that's interesting because there were certainly some issues around Gareth Jenkins and an alleged request for immunity before he appeared at the inquiry.
Whilst other matters were discussed at the hearing held on the 12th of January, the focus was on the Post Office's work related to the Microsoft Exchange repository. On the 31st of January this year, and following the hearing, you made directions which were published on the inquiry website. Those directions provided that, firstly, a meeting would be held between the representatives of the inquiry and the Post Office to discuss disclosure issues as soon as reasonably practicable, and in any event, well before the commencement of oral hearings in phases 5 and 6. You directed that the meeting would be minuted and that the minutes should be agreed and thereafter disclosed to core participants. And secondly, you ordered that a further disclosure hearing should be convened either before or during phases 5 and 6 of the inquiry. On the 28th of February 2024, members of the inquiry team and information management team met with the Post Office and its representatives in this building as directed by you, and the inquiry later circulated a copy of the minute of that meeting as agreed with the Post Office to core participants. I'll not read the minute in full, but I note that paragraph 3 of the minute, as circulated, says as follows. At the outset of the meeting, leading counsel to the inquiry, that's me, noted that from the inquiry's perspective, the aim of the meeting was to ensure that the Post Office are doing as much as possible to ensure phases 5 and 6 can proceed in accordance with the inquiry timetable. Mr. Jackson confirmed that the Post Office agreed and noted that the Post Office's starting point for the meeting was prioritising and clarifying what needed to be done in line with your directions, ensuring reasonable and proportionate disclosure whilst minimising and hopefully avoiding disruption to the hearing timetable and the inquiry's proceedings. Counsel to the inquiry confirmed that the aim was not minimising disruption to the hearings, but eliminating it, given the Post Office's highly disruptive late disclosure in Phase 4. Mr. Jackson confirmed that the Post Office also aspired to eliminate disruption wherever it was possible to do so, and that the Post Office's recent structural work should have mitigated the likelihood that a new disclosure issue would come from left field.
And if these aspirations can't be met, it's incumbent surely on the Post Office to come out and say why they can't meet these aspirations, because the inquiry's been going on a number of years now. It's not a new thing, it's not just been dropped on them. What is taking so long in terms of the disclosure of relevant information to the inquiry?
In order to achieve that objective, prior to the meeting, the inquiry had provided the Post Office with a series of deadlines for any further late disclosure of Microsoft Exchange documents in correspondence. In summary, quote, for all oral witnesses, but for those listed within the 4 weeks of the inquiry timetable, the inquiry directed that any late disclosure must be provided by the Post Office no later than 6 weeks before the date on which the witness is due to be called to give evidence. For the witnesses listed in the first 4 weeks, separate specific deadlines have been set in March 2024.